Maria Santos's hands were bleeding again. 3 in the morning, and the fluorescent lights of the downtown Boston office tower turned the blood seeping from her cracked knuckles into something darker, rust-colored, like the truth of her life was finally showing through. The chemical burn of industrial bleach filled her nostrils as she scrubbed the bathroom floor on her knees, the same position she'd been praying in 2 nights ago, begging God for a miracle she didn't believe was coming. If you believe that hard-working mothers deserve a chance, that people shouldn't be ignored just because they're struggling, hit that subscribe button for Invisible Romance Tales right now. Only people who look down on single moms trying to survive won't subscribe. Let me start at the beginning. The eviction notice crinkled in her jacket pocket with each movement. 30 days, it said, but the number felt like a countdown to the end of everything. In her mind's eye, she could see Sophia's winter boots sitting by their apartment door, the ones held together with duct tape because new ones cost money Maria didn't have. 7 years old, and her daughter was already learning that sometimes love wasn't enough to keep the cold out. When her phone screen lit up on the floor beside her, Maria's vision was so blurred from exhaustion she almost didn't see it. Private residence seeking live-in housekeeper. Exceptional compensation. Immediate placement. Discretion required. She didn't read the rest. Her bleeding fingers were already typing, already applying, already reaching for anything that might save them. She didn't know she was applying to work for a man whose real name was a secret even his enemies didn't dare speak. She didn't know his 5-year-old twin sons had terrorized 23 caregivers in 6 months, sending grown adults running into Boston streets in tears. She didn't know the brownstone in Beacon Hill had seen more blood than most crime scenes. She just knew she needed that job. What she didn't know could kill her. If you believe every child deserves someone who won't leave, subscribe to Invisible Romance Tales right now. Only people who abandon the ones who need them most won't hit that button. The memory came to Maria in flashes, the way trauma always did. Fragmented and sharp-edged, cutting through exhaustion like glass through skin. Sophia had been 4 years old when the police came. Dawn barely breaking, the kind of gray morning that made Boston feel like it was made of concrete and sorrow. Maria remembered the pounding on the door, not knocking, pounding, and how her hands had trembled as she'd opened it, already knowing. You always know. 3 officers. 2 squad cars blocking the street. And Carlos in handcuffs, eyes not meeting hers, not meeting Sophia's as their daughter stood in her Dora the Explorer pajamas asking, "Mama, why are they taking Daddy?" No trial. No bail. Just gone, swallowed by a system that didn't care that a little girl would spend the next 3 years asking when he was coming home. Maria had stopped trying to explain after the first year. How do you tell a child that their father chose the streets over them? That some people leave, and they don't come back, and love isn't always enough to make them stay? The landlord's voice had been cold when he'd called 6 months later. Rents tripling. New ownership. You've got 30 days. 30 days to find money she didn't have, in a city that ate people like her alive. So Maria worked. Double shifts scrubbing office buildings, her hands cracking and bleeding from industrial cleaners, sleeping 4 hours a night if she was lucky. She'd skip meals so Sophia could eat breakfast before school. She'd count coins on their kitchen table for lunch money, her daughter watching with eyes too old for her age, already learning that poverty was a math problem with no solution. "Mama," Sophia had whispered one night 3 weeks ago, their apartment so cold their breath made clouds in the dark. "Why don't we have heat?" Maria had pulled her daughter close, sharing body warmth, and lied. "It'll be fixed tomorrow, baby. I promise." But there were no more tomorrows. Just eviction notices and past due bills and the endless grinding realization that no matter how hard she worked, it would never be enough. Until that job listing appeared on her phone screen at 3 in the morning. 5 a.m., and Maria's shift finally ended. She'd scrubbed 12 bathroom stalls, mopped 8 floors, emptied 47 trash cans. Her back screamed. Her knees throbbed. But she didn't stop moving because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant breaking down. She made it home by 6, unlocked their apartment door as quietly as possible. Sophia was already awake. Her daughter had learned to wake herself up, had learned too many things too young. 7 years old and already making her own breakfast because Mama worked nights. "Morning, baby," Maria whispered, kissing the top of Sophia's head. "You smell like cleaning stuff." "I know. I'm sorry." "It's okay, Mama." Sophia was spreading peanut butter on bread, making her own lunch. "Mrs. Rodriguez said she'll walk me to school." Their neighbor, another single mother, another woman treading water in the same drowning pool. They helped each other because no one else would. Maria showered in 4 minutes, no time for more, and changed into the only professional clothes she owned. Black pants with a mended hem, a white button-down shirt she'd ironed last week. She checked her phone. The job listing had sent an automated response with an address. Beacon Hill. Her stomach dropped. Beacon Hill was where Boston kept its money, its power, its people who'd never counted coins for school lunch or chosen between heat and food. 7 a.m., and Maria stood outside a brownstone that cost more than she'd earn in 10 lifetimes. For stories of brick and history, windows that caught the morning light like they were hoarding it. Black iron fence. Security cameras she could see, and probably a dozen she couldn't. And a door, deep mahogany brass fixtures, that looked like it had been standing there since Boston was founded. Her worn sneakers looked obscene on the marble steps. She could smell the bleach on her clothes mixing with the scent of expensive candles drifting from inside. Cedar and something else, something that smelled like money. Her hands were still cracked and red, evidence of the night she'd just worked, and suddenly she was aware of everything. Her mended pants, her discount store shirt, the way her hair was pulled back in a ponytail because she didn't have time for anything else. The door opened before she could knock. The woman standing there wore a pressed black dress that probably cost more than Maria's rent. Hair in a perfect bun. Posture that spoke of private schools and old money, even though her face suggested she'd worked her way here the hard way, same as Maria. Her eyes took in everything, the worn sneakers, the exhausted face, the hands that told their own story. "Ms. Santos." Not a question. "You're here for the housekeeping position." "Yes, ma'am." "Do you have experience with children?" Maria blinked. The listing hadn't mentioned children. "I have a 7-year-old daughter." "Does that count?" The woman, Mrs. Chen, according to the name tag Maria noticed now, paused. Considered. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite hope, but something adjacent to it. "It might," she said finally. She stepped aside, but didn't move to let Maria enter. Instead, she held up one hand. "A warning. Before you come in, I need to be honest with you, Ms. Santos." Mrs. Chen's voice dropped lower. "Mr." She caught herself, like she'd almost said a name but remembered she shouldn't. "Jay has 5-year-old twin boys. They're intense. Intense." The word hung in the air between them, carrying weight it shouldn't. "We've had 23 caregivers in the past 6 months," Mrs. Chen continued, her voice flat now, like she'd said this speech so many times it had worn smooth. None of them lasted more than 12 hours. The posting said housekeeping, but frankly, Ms. Santos, we need someone who can handle the boys too. If you can manage both." She paused, and now Maria saw it clearly. Pity mixed with something darker. "Resignation, maybe," Or warning. The salary quadruples. 23 caregivers. 6 months. None lasting more than half a day. Maria should have walked away. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, go back down those marble steps, find another way. There was always another way. Except there wasn't. Not anymore. The eviction notice in her pocket was 3 weeks old. Sophia's boots had more duct tape than leather. And quadruple salary meant, God, it meant she could quit the night shifts. It meant heat. It meant Sophia could stop making her own lunches and learning that poverty was the only constant in life. Maria looked at her hands, cracked, bleeding, evidence of how hard she was already working for scraps. Then she thought of Sophia asking why they didn't have heat. Sophia in her taped-up boots. Sophia learning to wake herself up because Mama couldn't be there. I'll try, Maria said. And that's when she heard it. Not crying. Not playing. Screaming, raw, furious, full-throated screaming like 2 small humans declaring war on the world. The sound was primal, terrifying, the kind of noise that sent experienced caregivers running. Mrs. Chen's face didn't change. That would be the boys. The screaming grew louder. A crash from somewhere deeper in the brownstone. Another crash. Something breaking. Mrs. Chen sighed, pushed the door wider, and Maria stepped inside. Into what? She didn't yet know. But turning back wasn't an option anymore. If it ever had been. The brownstone's interior was a study in contrasts. Old money trying to contain new chaos. Mrs. Chen led Maria through a foyer with crown molding that probably predated the Civil War, past a living room with furniture that belonged in a museum, beneath a crystal chandelier that caught the morning light and scattered it like diamonds. Persian rugs, oil paintings in gilded frames, a grandfather clock ticking in the corner with the patience of something that had outlived generations. And cutting through all that carefully preserved elegance, the sound of destruction. They found the source in what must have been a formal sitting room before it became a war zone. 2 identical 5-year-old boys, mirror images of each other, creating absolute havoc in the middle of all that wealth. Dark hair, dark eyes, olive skin, beautiful children who looked like Renaissance paintings of angels. Except angels didn't tear books apart with their bare hands. Angels didn't use wooden blocks as hammers against 100-year-old hardwood floors. The first boy, Luca, Maria would learn, was ripping pages from what looked like a first edition something, throwing them in the air like confetti. They fell around him like snow, and his face was twisted in fury, tears streaming down his cheeks as he screamed words Maria couldn't understand. Italian, maybe, or just rage-given sound. The second boy, Marco, had a wooden block in both hands and was hammering it against the floor with methodical violence. Dents appeared in the wood with each strike. His face was red, sweat on his forehead, and he was crying too, but silently, just tears running down while he destroyed everything in reach. Boys! Mrs. Chen's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Commanding. The voice of someone who'd spent years managing chaos. Stop this immediately. Neither boy even looked at her. Luca threw another handful of torn pages. Marco struck the floor again. And again. Mrs. Chen turned to Maria, and the exhaustion in her face was complete. Not just tired, defeated. We've tried everything, she said quietly. Strict nannies who tried to overpower them. Gentle nannies who tried to reason with them. Nannies with every credential imaginable, every certification, every therapeutic technique. They either can't control the boys, or the boys break them so completely they quit. She paused. One woman left crying after 6 hours. Another called the police, thinking something was medically wrong with them. Maria watched the chaos unfold. Not with judgment. She'd learned a long time ago that judgment was a luxury people like her couldn't afford. She watched with the eyes of someone who understood that destruction was just another form of communication. Two little boys destroying everything in reach because they didn't have the words for what was destroying them inside. Have you asked them what they're angry about? Maria said quietly. Mrs. Chen's head whipped toward her. What? They're screaming and breaking things because something's wrong. Maria kept her eyes on the boys. Have you asked them what it is? Ms. Santos, they're 5 years old. They don't understand their own emotions. No, Maria said, and now she did look at Mrs. Chen. They understand exactly what they're feeling. They just don't know how to say it yet. Before Mrs. Chen could respond, before she could stop her, Maria walked toward the boys. She didn't yell, didn't try to grab them or stop the destruction. She just walked until she was close enough to be part of their orbit, close enough that they couldn't ignore her. Luca froze mid-throw, a torn page suspended in his hand. He held it up like a weapon, like he was daring her to yell at him the way everyone else probably had. His eyes narrowed, dark and defensive, and so full of pain it made Maria's chest ache. "Who are you?" he demanded, voice shaking with fury and something else. Fear, maybe. Maria crouched down to his level. Eye to eye. "Maria," she said simply. "Who are you?" The question landed like something physical. She could see it hit him, the surprise, the confusion. He wasn't expecting it. Nobody ever asked him who he was. They just told him what he couldn't do. "Luca," he said finally, voice smaller now. "And I'm Marco," the other boy shouted from across the room, still holding the wooden block but no longer hammering. Watching. Waiting to see what this stranger would do. Maria looked at both of them. Really looked. Torn pages caught in their hair like evidence. Flushed faces, sweat-damp skin, red-rimmed eyes from crying. And underneath all that destruction, underneath all that rage, two small boys who were drowning and didn't know how to ask for help. "Both of you," Maria said quietly, gently, "are really, really angry about something." They stared at her. Not with defiance now. With something closer to shock. Most adults yelled at them. Most adults tried to overpower them with force or authority or exasperation. Most adults gave up. But this woman with the tired eyes and the cracked hands was just sitting there, seeing them. "What are you so angry about?" Maria asked. Silence. Complete, total silence. Like someone had pressed pause on the entire room. The pages stopped falling. The wooden block didn't strike. Even the grandfather clock in the other room seemed to hold its breath. Both boys froze, staring at Maria like she'd asked them something in a language they'd forgotten they knew. And in that crystalline moment of stillness, the front door opened behind them. The air in the room changed instantly. Charged, tense, dangerous. Mrs. Chen straightened like a soldier coming to attention. Even the boys felt it, their small bodies going rigid. Maria turned around. And there he was. Jay. The man everyone called Jay because his real name was apparently something you didn't say out loud. The man whose brownstone this was. The man whose children these were. The man who, Maria realized with a jolt, looked nothing like what she'd expected. He was tall, over 6 feet, broad-shouldered in a way that suggested violence was always an option. Sharp jaw, dark eyes that missed absolutely nothing, black hair cut short and precise. He wore a black coat over a dark shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms marked with scars and ink. Tattoos Maria couldn't quite make out, but that looked like they told stories she probably didn't want to know. Old stories. Violent stories. He looked like authority. He looked like power. He looked like the kind of man who didn't ask questions twice, who didn't tolerate disobedience, who commanded respect through presence alone. Except when it came to the two little boys who, in the span of 30 seconds, had stopped screaming and were now clinging to Maria's arms like she was the safest thing they'd ever touched. What the hell is happening here? His voice was low, controlled, but it filled the entire room. Boston accent thick enough to place him. Southey, probably, or Dorchester. Somewhere that made men hard. Dad! The twins' heads whipped toward him in unison. They let go of Maria and started toward him, then stopped halfway, caught between the instinct to run to their father and the memory that they'd been mid-destruction when he walked in. Jay's eyes traveled across the scene with the precision of someone cataloging evidence. Torn books scattered like evidence of a crime. Dented hardwood floors. Two boys standing frozen between their father and this stranger. And Maria, still crouched on the floor, pages in her hair, looking up at him without fear. His gaze landed on her and stayed there. "You're the new housekeeper?" "Yes," Maria said, standing slowly. "And apparently the boys too." He looked at his sons, then back at her, like he was trying to solve an equation that didn't make sense. "They were holding on to you. Seems like it." He stared at her like she was a puzzle missing half its pieces. Like she'd done something impossible and he couldn't figure out the trick. "Nobody gets through to them," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Nobody." Maria met his gaze and held it. She'd learned a long time ago that powerful men expected you to look away first. That they fed on that moment when you broke eye contact and admitted they were more than you. But Maria was too tired and too desperate and too far past caring about the games people played. "Did anybody ever ask them what they're so angry about?" she said. The look on his face told her everything. This was a man who could command respect with a glance, who could make grown men afraid with a single word, who probably ran half of Boston's underworld, though Maria didn't know that yet, not completely. This was a man who knew how to build empires and break enemies. But he had absolutely no idea how to reach his own children. The realization hung in the air between them, and for just a moment, Maria saw past the power and the danger to the man underneath. A father who was failing at the only thing that really mattered. "Miss Maria," Marco whispered, tugging on her sleeve so gently she almost didn't feel it. "Can you stay with us?" Maria glanced at Mrs. Chen, who was watching this entire scene with something that looked like cautious hope. Then at Jay, whose face had shifted into something unreadable. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. So Maria made the choice for them. She sat down on the floor, right there in the middle of the destroyed sitting room, surrounded by torn pages and dented wood and the wreckage of 23 failed caregivers. She sat cross-legged, and both boys immediately crawled into her lap like baby birds finding shelter after a storm. Luca pressed his face against her shoulder, small hands fisting in her shirt. Marco wrapped his arms around her waist and held on like he was afraid she'd disappear if he let go. Both of them trembling, both of them crying quietly now. Not the furious screaming from before, but something softer. Sadder. The crying of children who'd been waiting for someone to see them. Maria held them. Just held them. Her arms around their small bodies, feeling the trembling gradually slow, the breathing gradually even out. She smelled like bleach and exhaustion and desperation, and these boys clung to her like she was safety itself. Jay didn't move. He just stood there in the doorway, frozen, watching his sons be gentle for what looked like the first time in months. Maybe longer. They've bitten caregivers, he said quietly, almost to himself. Like he was narrating a documentary of his own failure. They've thrown toys at people's heads. They've screamed until they made themselves sick. He stopped. Couldn't finish. Didn't need to. Maria didn't know what to say to that. So she didn't say anything. She just held the boys tighter, feeling their heartbeats against her chest, and thought about Sophia. About how children knew when they were safe and when they weren't. About how they could sense the difference between someone who wanted to control them and someone who just wanted to understand them. The weight of the boys in her arms was grounding. Real. Two small humans who needed something she could actually give. Not money, not security, not promises she couldn't keep. Just presence. Just someone who wouldn't walk away when they showed their wounds. She looked up and found Jay still watching her, his face unreadable but his eyes told a different story. They held something broken and desperate, and so carefully hidden that Maria almost missed it. A father who'd run out of options and didn't know what to do next. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Maria Santos." "Where are you from, Maria Santos?" "Dorchester." The part they don't put in the tourist brochures. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe. Respect for honesty, or for someone else who'd come up the hard way. "You got kids of your own?" "A daughter. Sophia. She's 7. And you took this job anyway." "Not a question. An observation." "I need this job," Maria corrected quietly. "There's a difference." He nodded slowly, like she'd just confirmed something he already suspected. Then he looked at his sons, still clinging to the stranger like she was salvation, and Maria saw his throat work as he swallowed something that might have been grief. "Mrs. Chen will show you to your room," he said finally. "You start today." He turned to leave, then stopped. Looked back. "Ms. Santos." "Yes. Thank you." The words came out rough, like he didn't say them often. Like they cost him something. Then he was gone, footsteps echoing down the hallway, leaving Maria sitting on the floor with 2 broken boys and the growing realization that she'd just stepped into something far more complicated than a housekeeping job. The boys finally fell asleep around 2 in the afternoon. Maria had spent the morning simply existing with them, not trying to clean, not trying to enforce rules, just being present. They'd followed her everywhere. To the kitchen, where she'd made them lunch and they'd insisted on helping, handing her ingredients with the solemnity of children performing a sacred ritual. To the playroom, where they'd shown her every toy, every drawing, every broken thing they wanted her to fix, narrating the story of each object like they were museum curators sharing their most prized possessions. And she'd listened. Really listened. Not with the distracted half-attention of adults who had more important things to do. With the full presence of someone who understood that to a child, these moments were the important things. By the time Mrs. Chen found them, both boys were sprawled on the playroom floor, asleep with their heads on Maria's lap. Luca's hand was wrapped around her wrist. Marco had his thumb in his mouth, a habit Maria suspected he'd been shamed for but couldn't break because comfort was comfort, and these boys had so little of it. Mrs. Chen stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching. Then she gestured for Maria to follow her into the hallway. Maria carefully extracted herself from the sleeping boys, tucking pillows beneath their heads, covering them with a blanket someone had left crumpled in the corner. They didn't wake. They looked peaceful for the first time since she'd arrived. Faces soft, breathing even, the fury drained out of them like poison finally released. In the hallway, Mrs. Chen spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. You should know something, Ms. Santos. About the boys. Maria waited, her back against the wall, exhaustion catching up with her now that she wasn't moving. She'd been awake for, what? 36 hours? More. Time had stopped meaning anything specific. Their mother left a year ago. Mrs. Chen's voice was flat, factual, like she was reporting the weather. But her eyes told a different story. No warning. No explanation. She was just gone one morning. Walked out while they were sleeping. Never came back. The words hit Maria like a physical blow. She thought of Sophia asking when Daddy was coming home. Thought of trying to explain abandonment to someone too young to understand that sometimes people leave and they don't come back and it isn't your fault but it feels like it is. Since then, Mrs. Chen continued, they haven't been to therapy. Jay tried. God knows he tried. He brought in the best child psychologists money could buy. But the boys refused to speak to anyone. They just shut down or exploded. Sometimes both at once. Maria's heart cracked open. So all this chaos, the screaming, the destruction, the 23 caregivers in 6 months, it wasn't wildness. It wasn't behavioral problems or developmental issues or any of the clinical terms people probably use to diagnose them from a distance. It was grief. Raw, unprocessed, year-old grief that had nowhere to go except out. Grief that manifested as rage because these boys were 5 years old and didn't have words for the hole their mother had left behind. They're not bad kids, Maria said slowly, and it wasn't a question. It was a realization taking shape in her mouth. They're heartbroken. Mrs. Chen nodded. And no one's known how to help them carry it. Every caregiver came in trying to control them, discipline them, fix them. Like they were problems to be solved instead of children who were hurting. Maria looked toward the playroom where 2 5-year-old boys were finally resting. Finally safe enough to sleep without fear that the person watching them would disappear. They didn't need someone to fix them, she said quietly. They needed someone who wouldn't leave. Yes, Mrs. Chen said. Exactly. There was something else in her voice now. Relief, maybe. Or hope. The desperate hope of someone who'd been watching children suffer and couldn't find a way to help them. There's one more thing you should know. Mrs. Chen hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Jay blames himself. For all of it. He thinks if he'd been different, been softer, been more present, she would have stayed. And he looks at those boys and sees his failure reflected back at him every single day. Maria thought about the man she'd met this morning. All power and controlled violence and careful distance. A man who could command empires but couldn't figure out how to hug his own children. That's why he doesn't know how to reach them, she said. He's drowning in guilt. We're all drowning in something, Ms. Santos. Mrs. Chen's voice was soft now, almost kind. The question is whether we're brave enough to let someone throw us a rope. Maria's first full day in the brownstone became a study in attachment. The boys woke from their nap and immediately searched for her. Panic in their voices when they couldn't see her, relief flooding their faces when they found her in the kitchen preparing dinner. They wouldn't let her out of their sight after that. Followed her everywhere like small, determined shadows. She cleaned the kitchen. They handed her sponges and asked 1,000 questions. Why does soap make bubbles? Where does the water go when it goes down the drain? Do you have a little girl? Does she like dinosaurs? Marco likes dinosaurs. Luca likes space. Do you like space? She organized shelves. They showed her where everything belonged, narrating the history of each room like tour guides who'd memorized their script. This is where Mama used to read to us. This is where we used to have breakfast. This is where Dad taught us to tie our shoes, except we still can't do it right. Before lunch, Marco asked if she could tell them a story. Not read one, tell one. From her head. So Maria made one up, pulling from memories of the stories she told Sophia when bedtime came and there was no money for new books. She told them about two brave knight brothers, twins of course, who protected their kingdom from dragons. Not by fighting, she was careful to clarify, but by understanding what the dragons needed. Turned out the dragons were just scared and lonely and acting out because no one had ever asked them what was wrong. The boys listened like she was giving them air after years of drowning. Luca crawled into her lap. Marco pressed against her side. And when she finished, they begged for another one, and then another, until Mrs. Chan appeared to announce lunch was ready. At the table, both boys claimed permanent spots on either side of Maria. Not next to their father's empty chair at the head of the table, next to her. Pressed as close as they could get without actually sitting in her lap. And Maria understood something fundamental. These boys didn't need rules or discipline or behavioral modification. They needed presence. They needed consistency. They needed someone who showed up and stayed, day after day, without disappearing. They needed what every child needed, to know they mattered. Jay appeared briefly during dinner, back from whatever business kept him away during the day. He stopped in the doorway of the dining room and just watched for a moment. Watched his sons eating without screaming, talking to Maria about their day, laughing at something she'd said. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, those dark, careful eyes, held something raw. Maria caught his gaze across the room and saw a man trying to solve an equation he'd been failing at for a year. Trying to understand how this stranger with cracked hands and exhausted eyes had done in one day what 23 professionals couldn't do in 6 months. He didn't join them for dinner. Just nodded once and disappeared down the hallway, footsteps echoing on hardwood like a ghost haunting his own house. Maria couldn't sleep. It was past midnight, the brownstone quiet except for the sounds old houses make. Settling foundations, creaking wood, the whisper of heating systems cycling on and off. She'd been given a room on the 3rd floor, small but comfortable, with a window that looked out over Beacon Hill's gaslit streets. Luxury she couldn't have imagined a week ago. But sleep wouldn't come. Too much had changed too fast. Her mind kept circling back to Sophia, safe at the neighbor's apartment for tonight, probably already asleep. Tomorrow Maria would bring her here, to this brownstone, to this strange new life. If she survived that long. She went downstairs for water, barefoot on cold marble, wearing the same clothes she'd arrived in because she hadn't thought to bring anything else. Hadn't thought about much beyond getting through the interview. The kitchen was dark except for the ambient light from the street. Maria filled a glass from the tap, the water cold enough to make her teeth ache, and turned to find Jay sitting at the table. She nearly dropped the glass. He was just sitting there in the dark, staring at nothing, a bottle of something expensive looking on the table in front of him. Still dressed, black shirt, black pants, like he couldn't bring himself to let his guard down even in his own home. "You're up late," Maria said, because someone had to break the silence. "I don't sleep much." His voice was rough, tired, human. Maria sat across from him without asking permission. Exhaustion made her bold, or maybe just careless. "Me neither." Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, exactly. More like two strangers acknowledging they were both stranded in the same storm. Then Jay spoke, his voice quieter than she'd heard it before. Vulnerable. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "The parenting. Any of it." He looked at her now, and in the darkness his face seemed younger somehow. Less dangerous. More lost. Their mother, she was the one who knew how to reach them. She knew what they needed, what they were thinking, how to make them feel safe. I just provided, protected, made sure they had everything money could buy. His laugh was bitter. Turns out that's not what they needed. Maria felt the weight of his words settle over the room like snow. What happened to her? She asked carefully. Their mother. She left. Simple words. Devastating truth. Walked out one morning and never came back. No note. No explanation. No warning. I woke up and she was just gone. Like we meant nothing to her. Like they meant nothing. And the boys. They blame themselves. They think if they'd been better, quieter, easier, if they'd been different, she would have stayed. He picked up the bottle, looked at it, set it down without drinking. I blame myself, too, for not seeing it coming, for not being enough to make her want to stay. Maria thought about Carlos, about how he'd left without looking back, about explaining to Sophia that sometimes people leave and it isn't your fault but your heart doesn't know the difference. I don't know how I'm still standing either, she admitted quietly. Some days I feel like I'm held together by coffee and sheer terror, by the desperate hope that if I just keep moving, keep working, keep trying, maybe we'll make it to tomorrow. She paused. But I keep going because Sophia needs me to. And your boys, they need you to keep going too. He looked at her then. Not like a boss looking at an employee. Not like a powerful man assessing someone beneath him. Like one broken person recognizing another in the dark. They don't need me to be perfect, Maria continued. They don't need me to have answers or be strong all the time. They just need me to be here, present with them, not drowning in guilt or running from pain. Just here. That's what they need from you too, she said gently. Not protection or provision or power. Just you. The father who's here. The father who keeps showing up even when it's hard. Jay didn't respond, but something shifted in his expression. A crack in the armor, a glimpse of the man underneath all that careful control. A father who loved his children and didn't know how to show them. Thank you, he said finally. For today. For whatever you did. I just held them, Maria said. No one else could. Before Maria could respond, she heard it, the front door opening. Urgent, rushed. Footsteps that didn't belong to anyone who lived here. Jay was on his feet instantly, his entire body shifting from vulnerable father to something else, something dangerous and coiled and ready. Maria pressed herself back from the table as a man she didn't recognize burst into the kitchen. Blood on his shirt. A gash across his forehead, fresh and bleeding. Eyes wild with fear or adrenaline or both. He spoke rapidly to Jay in low, clipped tones, English mixed with Italian, words tumbling out too fast for Maria to follow. But she caught fragments. Castellano family, making their move, boss, it's not safe. They know about the house. They're coming. Jay's expression didn't change, didn't flicker, but his hand moved, casual, practiced, like he'd done this 1,000 times, to a drawer beneath the kitchen counter. When he pulled it open, Maria saw what was inside. Guns. Multiple guns. Arranged like kitchen utensils, like they belonged there alongside the silverware and dish towels. Jay pulled out a Glock. Maria didn't know guns, but even she could tell it was expensive, well-maintained, deadly, and checked it with movements that spoke of long familiarity. Then he looked at the bleeding man and spoke in Italian, voice low and commanding. The man nodded and disappeared back the way he came. Maria's blood had gone cold. She was pressed against the wall now, glass of water forgotten on the table, heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. This wasn't a wealthy man with traumatized children. This wasn't just a father struggling to connect with his sons. This was a mafia boss. This was Jay, the man whose name made people go silent when it was spoken. The man whose reputation was whispered about in Boston's darkest corners, in rooms where power was measured in violence and loyalty was worth more than money. And Maria had just moved into his house with her daughter waiting at home. Jay turned to her, gun still in his hand, and for the first time she saw him completely. Not the struggling father, not the powerful employer, but the man he really was. The man who lived in a world where guns in kitchen drawers were necessary, where bleeding men brought warnings in the middle of the night, where danger was always one breath away. "You should go back to your room, Ms. Santos," he said quietly. "Not a threat, a warning, protection even. And lock your door." Maria couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only think, what have I gotten myself into? Jay's expression softened slightly. "You're safe here," he said, like he could read her thoughts. "Whatever happens, you and the boys are safe. I promise you that." But Maria had heard promises before, had learned the hard way that promises from powerful men were worth exactly nothing when the world came crashing down. She walked past him on legs that felt like water, climbed the stairs to her room, closed the door, and stood there in the dark, trembling. Below her, she could hear movement, voices, the sound of more people arriving, the brownstone waking up to whatever crisis was unfolding. And Maria thought about Sophia, about the eviction notice, about being so desperate for money that she'd walked into a situation she didn't understand and couldn't escape. She thought about two little boys sleeping peacefully down the hall, finally trusting someone after a year of fear. And she knew, with the sick certainty that comes from understanding you've already crossed a line you can't uncross. Leaving wasn't an option anymore. Not because she couldn't, but because those boys needed her. And abandoning them would break something in her that poverty and exhaustion hadn't managed to destroy yet. Her conscience. Maria Santos had walked into a mafia boss's house thinking she was taking a housekeeping job. She'd stayed because she'd fallen in love with two heartbroken children. And now she was trapped in a world where love and danger lived at the same address. And leaving meant choosing herself over two boys who'd already been abandoned once. If you believe mothers and children deserve safety, not violence, subscribe to Ebony and Pearl Stories right now. Only people who think danger is acceptable when kids are involved won't hit that button. Comment "Protect the Innocent" if you're really watching, because what came next would force Maria to decide what she was truly willing to sacrifice for the children who needed her. Maria didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her bed, fully dressed, listening to the sounds of the brownstone, voices conferring in low tones, footsteps moving with purpose, the occasional crackle of a radio. The architecture of danger organizing itself around her. Around 4 a.m, the sound stopped. The house went quiet again, holding its breath. But Maria kept thinking about that gun. About the drawer that opened so casually, like violence was just another kitchen tool. About the bleeding man and the name he'd spoken. Castellano family. She should leave. Take Sophia and run as far as quadruple salary would carry them. Find another way to survive. Except, down the hall, 2 5-year-old boys were sleeping. 2 boys who'd finally stopped screaming because someone had asked them what they needed. 2 boys who'd clung to her like she was the first safe thing they'd touched in a year. And Maria thought about Sophia's father, about how he'd left without looking back, about how abandonment carved holes in children that never quite healed, just scarred over and ached when the weather changed. She thought about being the kind of person who left when things got hard, who chose safety over showing up, who taught children that adults couldn't be trusted because eventually everyone walked away. By the time dawn broke over Beacon Hill's brick facades and gaslit streets, Maria had made her decision. She was going to stay, and she was going to bring Sophia here. Not because it was safe. She wasn't stupid enough to believe that anymore. But because those boys needed someone who wouldn't disappear. And if Maria was going to survive in this world, if she was going to keep her daughter fed and warm and sheltered, then she needed to commit completely. No half measures. No exit strategies. All in. It was the most terrifying decision she'd ever made. Jay found her in the kitchen at 7, making coffee with hands that still trembled slightly. He looked like he hadn't slept either. Same clothes as last night, shadows under his eyes that spoke of hours spent dealing with whatever crisis the bleeding man had brought. But when he saw Maria, something in his face shifted. Surprise, maybe. He'd expected her to run. "You're still here," he said. "I'm still here." Maria poured coffee into 2 mugs, slid one across the counter to him. "I need to ask you something." "Ask." "My daughter, Sophia. She's 7. Maria met his eyes. "I want to bring her here. To live with me. If I'm going to do this job, if I'm going to be here for your boys, I need my daughter with me." Jay was quiet for a long moment, studying her. Then, "Bring her. Just like that. There's a guest room on the 3rd floor, next to yours. She'll be safe here." The word, safe, hung between them like a question neither of them wanted to answer. Safe from what? Safe from the Castellano family? Safe from the violence that lived in kitchen drawers? Or just safe from eviction and hunger and the grinding poverty that had been drowning them both? "Safer than she is out there," Jay added quietly, like he could read her thoughts. "Whatever happens, Maria, I protect the people in this house. That includes you. That includes your daughter." Maria wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. But belief was another luxury she'd learned not to afford. "Okay," she said instead. "I'll get her after breakfast." Jay nodded, started to leave, then paused. "The boys asked for you already. Twice. They were afraid you'd left during the night." The words hit her harder than they should have. 2 boys waking up in fear, checking to make sure she hadn't disappeared like everyone else. "I should go see them," Maria said. "Yeah," Jay said softly. "You should." By the time Maria collected Sophia from the neighbor's apartment, the sun was fully up and Beacon Hill was pretending to be elegant again. All historic charm and old money, hiding its violence behind brick facades and expensive landscaping. Sophia emerged from Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment with her backpack, her stuffed rabbit clutched under one arm, and 7-year-old suspicion written all over her face. She'd packed her own things, clothes rolled tight the way Maria had taught her, toothbrush in a plastic bag, the photo of her and her father that she kept even though he'd been gone for 3 years. "Is this because we got evicted?" Sophia asked as they walked to the car Jay had sent. A black sedan with a driver who didn't speak, didn't make eye contact, just drove. "No, baby. This is because Mama got a really good job. A live-in job. Which means we get to stay in a nice house and you get your own room." "What kind of house?" "A really, really nice one." Sophia looked at her with eyes too old for her age. "What's the catch?" Maria's heart cracked. 7 years old and already understanding that good things came with catches. That nothing was free. That survival required calculation. "There are 2 little boys," Maria said carefully. "They're 5. Twins. And they need someone to take care of them because their mom left." "Like Dad left us?" "Yeah, baby. Like that." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window at streets that got progressively nicer as they drove. "Are they sad? Really sad?" "Then I'll be nice to them," Sophia decided. "Because I know what sad feels like." Maria pulled her daughter close, pressed a kiss to her hair, and thought about how children understood things adults forgot. How empathy was natural until the world taught you it was weakness. The twins met Sophia in the foyer, and Maria watched something she'd never quite seen before. Instant recognition. Like magnets finding each other across a room. Like 3 kids who'd all been marked by abandonment and could sense it in each other. Luca stepped forward first, cautiously. "I'm Luca. Sophia." Her voice was steady, confident in the way she'd learned to be. "I'm 7. We're 5, Marco added, appearing at his brother's shoulder. "We're twins." "I can see that." Sophia looked them over with the assessing gaze of someone used to evaluating situations quickly. "You guys got any toys?" "So many toys," Luca said, and suddenly his face lit up, the first real smile Maria had seen from him. "You want to see?" "Yeah, okay." And just like that, they were gone. 3 kids thundering up the stairs to the playroom, Sophia's backpack abandoned in the foyer, the twins talking over each other to tell her about their cars and blocks and the robot vacuum they liked to ride. Mrs. Chen appeared beside Maria, watching them go. "Well," she said quietly, "that was easier than expected." "Kids know their own," Maria said. "They can smell grief on each other." By lunch, the 3 of them were inseparable. Luca showed Sophia his collection of toy cars, organizing them by color and explaining the story of each one with the seriousness of a museum curator. Marco challenged her to a race around the living room, not running, just fast walking because Mrs. Chen said no running indoors, and Sophia won but pretended it was close because she understood instinctively that these boys needed to feel capable of something. They ate together at the kitchen table, Maria watching as Sophia became the big sister the twins had never had. Patient when they talked over her. Encouraging when they showed her things. Firm when they started to bicker. "Hey, we don't yell at each other in this family, okay?" Using the word family like it was already true. And the twins, they bloomed under her attention. Had someone their own size to play with. Someone who didn't treat them like problems to be solved or trauma to be fixed. Just another kid who understood what it meant to have a parent disappear. Jay watched it all from doorways, from the edges of rooms, his face unreadable but his eyes. Always his eyes told the truth. He was watching his sons laugh for the first time in a year. Watching them be children instead of grief wrapped in small bodies. Watching Maria create the family he didn't know how to build. The breakthrough came 3 days later. Maria was in her room folding laundry. Her own clothes mixed with Sophia's, the mundane domesticity of a life that was starting to feel almost normal, when she heard the crash. Not the controlled chaos of children playing. Something else. Something devastating. She ran down the hallway to the boys' room and found Marco on the floor, surrounded by broken glass. He'd knocked over a picture frame, the only photograph of their mother Maria had seen anywhere in the brownstone. The woman smiled up from the shattered glass, frozen in time, forever young and beautiful and gone. It had been sitting on the dresser, probably untouched for a year because even looking at it hurt too much. Marco was shaking, tears streaming down his face, his whole body trembling with a kind of fear that goes beyond physical pain. "I broke it," he sobbed. "I broke it. I broke Mama. I broke her." Luca stood frozen by the door, pale and terrified, like he expected punishment or worse, expected someone to take the picture away forever, to erase the last visible proof that their mother had existed. Sophia was pressed against the wall, eyes wide, clearly wanting to help but not knowing how. Maria knelt beside Marco, glass crunching under her knees, and pulled him into her arms without hesitation. "You didn't break her," she said softly, firmly. "You broke the glass. That's all. The picture's still here. She's still here." "But Marco couldn't finish, crying too hard, his whole body shaking with the force of it. "You broke the glass," Maria repeated, holding him tighter. "The glass can be replaced. The picture is fine. Your mama is still here in this picture. You didn't lose her." "I miss her," Marco choked out, and the words came from somewhere so deep and raw that Maria felt them like a physical blow. "I miss her, and I don't remember what her voice sounds like anymore." And that broke something open in all of them. Luca started crying. Not the rage screaming from before, but something deeper. Grief finally finding permission to exist. He crossed the room and collapsed into Maria's other arm, and she held both boys while they sobbed. A year of grief finally finding somewhere safe to land. Sophia moved closer, sitting beside them, one small hand on Marco's back. Not saying anything, just there. Showing these boys that you could sit with someone's pain without trying to fix it. Maria held them and let them cry. Let them grieve. Let them finally release the poison that had been building inside them since the morning their mother walked out and never came back. She didn't notice Jay standing in the doorway until she looked up and saw his face. He looked like a man watching something he thought he'd never see again. His sons being held, being soft, being allowed to be heartbroken instead of angry. Being children who were sad instead of children who were problems. His hand went to his face, covering his eyes, and Maria saw his shoulders shake once before he turned and walked away down the hall. But she'd seen enough. Seen the father underneath the armor. The man who loved his children so much it was killing him, and didn't know how to show them. That night, after the boys were asleep, curled together in one bed, exhausted from crying, Sophia reading them one more story before tucking them in like she'd done it 1,000 times, Jay found Maria in the kitchen. She was making tea with hands that still felt unsteady, trying to process everything that had happened. Trying to figure out how she'd become so tangled up in these people's lives in less than a week. "Thank you," Jay said quietly, standing in the doorway like he wasn't sure he was allowed to enter his own kitchen. "For what you did today. I just held them. No one's been able to do that." His voice was rough, raw. "Not since." He stopped. Swallowed hard. "Not since she left." Maria poured 2 cups of tea, pushed one across the counter to him. Waited. "She didn't die," Jay said finally, the words coming slow and painful. "Their mother. She didn't die. She left. Walked out one morning while they were sleeping and never came back. No note. No explanation. No warning. Just gone. Like we meant nothing to her. Like they meant nothing." The words hung in the air like smoke, bitter and choking. "The boys blame themselves," he continued, voice barely above a whisper. "They think they did something wrong. They think if they'd been better, quieter, easier, if they'd been different somehow, she would have stayed." "And you?" Maria asked gently. He looked at her, and she saw past all the power and danger to the man underneath. The father. The person who'd failed at the only thing that mattered. I blame myself too, he said. For not seeing it coming. For not being enough to make her want to stay. For building this life that was supposed to keep them safe and protected, and all it did was drive her away. His hands clenched into fists on the counter. For looking at those boys every day and seeing proof that I failed them. Maria understood then. Understood why he kept his distance. Why he provided everything except presence. Because being close meant confronting his own guilt. Meant seeing his failure reflected in their faces. They don't blame you, she said quietly. They just miss her. And they need you to still be here. Not drowning in guilt or punishing yourself. Present with them. Showing up even when it hurts. Jay looked at her like no one had ever said that to him before. Like she'd spoken a truth he'd been running from for a year. I don't know how to do that, he admitted. How to be soft. How to be the father they need. You learn, Maria said simply. You show up. You try. You fail sometimes and try again. That's what parenting is. Just showing up over and over until they believe you're not going to disappear. Something shifted in his expression. Not hope, exactly. But something adjacent to it. A man considering that maybe things could be different. Thank you, he said again. For staying. For them. I'm not doing it for them, Maria said honestly. I'm doing it for me too. For Sophia. Because we needed this. Needed somewhere to belong. Jay nodded slowly. Then, the danger is real, Maria. The Castellano family, they know where I live. They know about the boys. That's why I've doubled security. That's why I need you to understand what you're walking into. I understand. Do you? His eyes were intense now, serious. Because if you stay, you're part of this. You and Sophia. You're under my protection, which means you're also a target. Anyone who wants to hurt me will look at you and see leverage. Maria's mouth went dry. But she'd already made her choice, hadn't she? The moment she'd held those boys. The moment she'd let Sophia unpack her things in the room next door. Then protect us, she said. You said you would. I'm choosing to believe you. It was the closest thing to trust she could offer. And from the look on Jay's face, he understood exactly how much that cost her. I will, he said. I swear it. The danger came closer faster than either of them expected. The next week, Maria picked Sophia up from her new school, a private academy in Beacon Hill that Jay had enrolled her in, where uniforms were required and tuition cost more than Maria used to make in 6 months. Sophia had her backpack, was chattering about her day, about a girl named Emma who'd shared her cookies at lunch. Maria was only half listening because she'd noticed the black SUV 3 blocks back. 4 blocks. 5. It was following them. Not obviously. Not aggressively. Just there. Maintaining distance but never turning off, never disappearing. Matching every turn Maria made as she drove the route back to the brownstone. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Mama! Sophia's voice was small. Is that car following us? I don't know, baby. Probably not. But it was. And they both knew it. The SUV didn't stop until Maria pulled into the brownstone's private garage, the security gate closing behind them with a clang that sounded like a prison door locking. Or protection sliding into place. Depending on how you looked at it. Maria sat there for a moment, hands shaking on the wheel, watching the SUV idle outside the gate before finally driving away. They know where Sophia goes to school, she thought. They know our route. They're watching us. That night, Jay came home with a look Maria hadn't seen before on his face. Fear. Real, genuine fear. There was a message, he said, voice tight. Left on my car. They know where I live. They know about the boys. They mentioned them by name. He doubled security overnight. More guards appeared. Men in dark suits with earpieces and guns hidden beneath expensive jackets. More cameras. More locked doors. The brownstone transformed from home to fortress, and Maria watched it happen with growing dread. Later, she found Jay standing at the window of his study, watching her play with the children in the backyard. A small enclosed space with high walls and no sight lines from the street. Safe, theoretically. But Maria could feel his doubt even from a distance. "Why do you care so much about them?" he asked when she came inside, his voice quiet, searching. "They're not yours." Maria looked through the window at Sophia showing Marco how to do a cartwheel, at Luca trying to copy them and landing in a heap, all three of them dissolving into laughter. "Because someone needs to," she said. "Because they deserve to be children. Not problems. Not burdens. Not chess pieces in whatever war you're fighting. Just kids." She turned to face him. "And because I know what it's like to need someone and have no one show up. I know what it's like to be drowning and watch people walk past like you're invisible. So I'm showing up. For them. For Sophia. For all of us." Jay didn't respond. But when she looked at him, she saw something she hadn't seen before. Hope. Fragile, uncertain hope. Like a man who'd been living in darkness so long he'd forgotten what light looked like. Like maybe, just maybe, he was starting to believe things could be different. That his sons could heal. That he could learn to be the father they needed. That this strange, makeshift family they were building could actually survive. And maybe, though neither of them would say it out loud yet, that Maria Santos with her cracked hands and fierce heart was exactly what all of them had been waiting for. If you believe families are built through showing up, not biology, subscribe to Ebony and Pearl Stories right now. Only people who think blood is the only thing that matters won't hit that button. Comment chosen family if you're still with us, because what happens next will test every bond they've built. The Castellano family isn't finished. And the choice Maria has to make will determine whether love is stronger than fear. By the time Maria turned onto 7th Avenue, her fingers had gone numb from gripping the steering wheel. The black SUV had appeared 2 blocks after leaving Sophia's school. Quiet, smooth, never passing them, never falling too far behind. At first she told herself it wasn't what it looked like. New York was full of black SUVs. But 3 blocks turned into 5. 5 into 7. And every time she checked the rearview mirror, the same dark shape filled the same corner of glass. "Mom!" Sophia's voice broke the tight silence. "Is that car following us?" Maria's throat dried. She didn't answer, didn't trust her voice to be steady, only reached across the seat and squeezed Sophia's hand. When they finally reached the brownstone, the SUV didn't pull away, didn't turn a corner. It idled for a moment across the street, watching. Only when Maria shoved the front door shut behind them did it disappear. Her heart was thundering so hard she felt each beat in her palms. She locked the door twice with shaking hands, ushering Sophia deeper inside, trying to keep her own fear from leaking into her voice. But the truth settled coldly in her chest. They weren't safe anymore. Not anywhere. Jay came home late, later than usual, but the moment Maria saw his face, she knew something had shifted. He closed the door behind him with a slow, deliberate motion, as if any sudden noise might break something fragile inside him. "There was a message left on my car," he said quietly. Not angry, not stern, just afraid. They know where I live, and they know about the boys. The words struck harder than any threat. Within an hour, security doubled. New cameras blinked from corners of the hallways. Extra guards stood outside the doors. Jay oversaw every detail himself, checking locks, repositioning cameras, murmuring sharp instructions into his phone. But what caught Maria off guard was the moment he paused by the living room window. She was on the carpet with the children, rolling toy cars for Marco, helping Luca with a puzzle, Sophia curled against her side. Jay stood behind the glass, expression unreadable. Why do you care so much about them? He asked at last, voice low. They're not yours. Maria looked down at the children, three fragile worlds trying hard to pretend they weren't afraid. Because someone needs to, she said softly. Because they deserve to be children, not problems. Just kids. Jay breathed out, something in him loosening. For the first time, there was hope in his eyes, thin, trembling, but real. As if believing things might change felt dangerous, but maybe possible. The boys were finally asleep, she thought. The hallway outside their room was dim, the air still. Maria pressed her phone to her ear. I don't know if I can stay, she whispered to her sister. That SUV, if they know where Sophia goes to school, if they're watching. I can't put my daughter in danger. Her voice cracked on the last word. She didn't hear the small footsteps, didn't see the two shadows behind her, didn't know her words were sinking into two small hearts already battered by abandonment. No! The scream tore down the hallway. Maria spun around. Luca stood in the doorway, face red, chest heaving, eyes wild with betrayal. Marco hovered behind him, lower lip trembling, hands curled into frightened fists. You can't leave. Luca's voice shattered. You promised. Before she could speak, Marco hurled a toy truck against the wall. It hit with a crack. Luca was screaming now, raw, unfiltered pain, while Marco swept a bookshelf clean, books and toys crashing to the floor. This wasn't misbehavior. This was fear. You're leaving like everyone else. Luca sobbed. You said you'd stay. You lied. Marco crumpled to the floor, hands over his ears, rocking hard, choking on his cries. Maria froze, guilt clawing up her chest. Her mistake cut deeper than she'd imagined. They weren't afraid of punishment. They were afraid of being left behind again. Into this storm walked 7-year-old Sophia. She stepped between Maria and the twins, small and steady, her voice soft but firm. Stop. She looked at the boys, not flinching at their rage. She's not leaving because she doesn't care. She's scared. People followed us today. She's trying to protect me. The boys stopped, breathing jagged, eyes wide. You're scared she'll leave like everyone else, Sophia said gently. Right. Luca's chin quivered. He nodded. Sophia took his hand. She won't. My mom doesn't leave people. She's the only one who never leaves. Maria felt her heart twist. Because in that moment she finally understood what she had become to these boys. Not staff. Not hired help. Not a temporary fix. The one person who had stayed long enough for them to trust. And she had been ready to walk away. Maria sank to the floor in the wrecked hallway, the boys' toys scattered around her like the remains of a tiny hurricane. She didn't try to scold them, didn't try to reason. She simply opened her arms. Come here. Luca hesitated for only a heartbeat before launching himself toward her, sobs tearing through his small frame. Marco followed, collapsing against her side, clinging so hard his nails dug into her shirt. They cried with the force of children who had held everything in for too long. Grief, fear, the ache of being left again and again. Maria wrapped both boys against her chest. Sophia knelt beside them, placing a gentle hand on Marco's back, her touch soft as breath. A sound in the doorway made Maria look up. Jay stood there. She didn't know how long he'd been watching. Long enough, she suspected, to see the storm, its cause, its cost. His face had gone pale, jaw rigid, but his eyes were shattered. Then, slowly, he lowered himself to the ground. Not falling, just folding, like a man suddenly too heavy to stand. His voice came out cracked. Please, please stay. It wasn't a command. It wasn't even a request. It was a plea from a father who had just witnessed the truth. These children loved her, needed her, broke without her, and he had no idea how to keep them whole. Name your salary, Jay said, breath unsteady. Name anything. I'll give you whatever you want. Just, please don't leave them. This powerful man, feared, respected, obeyed, knelt on a ruined carpet, desperation making him look younger, more human, almost fragile. Maria shook her head, torn. Jay, it's not the job. It's Sophia. I can't put her in danger. That SUV followed us. They know her school. They know where she lives. The thought alone made her voice splinter. Jay reacted instantly. Then stay here. Both of you. Full time. Maria blinked, stunned. I'll put guards at Sophia's school. Around the building. On every corner. 24/7 surveillance. She will be protected like my own sons. He turned toward Sophia, who was still holding Marco's hand, steady and brave despite her fear. Jay met the girl's eyes with a look Maria had never seen from him. Gentle, promising. Then he looked back at Maria. You're not staff anymore, he said quietly. You're family. All of you. And I protect my family. The words settled into the room with a weight so deep it seemed to still the air. Family. For Maria, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, terrified to fall, terrified not to. For the children, it was hope. For Jay, it was a confession. The lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then died, leaving the hallway in a dim red emergency glow. An alarm shrieked from the basement. Jay's phone buzzed. He snatched it up, listened for 2 seconds, and his face drained of color. Get the children to the safe room. Now. Maria's stomach dropped. What's happening? They're here. His voice was deadly calm. The Castellano family. They breached the perimeter. Maria's blood froze. Chaos erupted instantly. Jay's men swarmed through the brownstone, voices sharp and overlapping. Lock down the east entrance. They're at the alley. Positions, move. Gunfire cracked outside. Loud, violent, real. The children screamed. Maria grabbed all 3 kids, pulling them close as Jay's men shouted instructions, weapons drawn, running toward danger. She dragged the children down the hall, heart pounding so hard she could barely see straight. Another blast. Glass shattered somewhere behind them. Hurry! Jay shouted from down the hall. Maria reached the reinforced steel door, yanked it open, shoved the children inside. No windows. Thick walls. A single heavy light overhead. She stepped in front of them, spreading her arms wide, body trembling but firm. Stay behind me. Don't move. Don't make a sound. Luca shook so violently she thought he might collapse. Marco squeezed his eyes shut and buried his face in Sophia's shoulder. Sophia grabbed Maria's hand, her palm cold, small fingers shaking. "Mom!" Sophia whispered, voice cracking. "Are we going to die?" Maria dropped to one knee, cupping Sophia's face with a steadiness she didn't feel. "No," she said softly. "I won't let anything happen to you. Any of you." Gunfire pounded through the walls. 3 minutes, maybe less, each second stretching into eternity. Then, silence. A silence so sudden and absolute it rang in their ears. Maria didn't breathe. The children didn't move. They waited, hearts thudding, air thick with fear, until a voice finally sounded on the other side of the door. A knock. Firm. Controlled. "Maria," Jay said. "It's clear. They're gone." Maria opened the safe room door slowly, each inch releasing a tighter breath from her lungs. Jay stood on the other side, shirt torn at the sleeve, blood smeared across his knuckles, a shallow cut along his cheek. He was breathing hard, but he was alive. More alive than she'd ever seen him. Behind her, the 3 kids stayed close, their small bodies pressed together. Maria blocked them instinctively, one arm sweeping protectively across their chests. Jay's gaze moved to her first. The way she stood. Where she stood. Then he looked down at the children huddled behind her. Shaking, pale, but safe. Something changed in his eyes. Something deep and wordless. Gratitude was there, yes. But beneath it, something more anchored. More personal. A recognition not of an employee but of a partner. Someone who'd risked everything to protect what he loved most. The air carried the metallic tang of gunpowder, faint but unmistakable. The hallway was littered with dust shaken loose from the walls. The children's breathing came fast, short, terrified. Maria's hands trembled now that she no longer had to be the shield. Jay stepped closer, slowly. Not because he doubted her strength, because he respected it. No one spoke. But a quiet understanding passed between them. She didn't run. She chose them in the moment danger was real. Hours later, after Jay's men secured every window, every corner, every shadow, Maria found him outside the children's room. His knuckles were bandaged, shirt changed, hair damp from a rushed shower. But nothing could hide the heaviness in his eyes. "I won't let anything touch them," he said quietly. "Or you. I swear it." She wanted to believe him. And something in her chest whispered that she finally did. Inside the room, the twins and Sophia were curled together on one bed. 3 small bodies seeking safety in the only way they knew. All 3 heads lifted the moment Maria stepped inside. Luca sat up, voice tiny. "Are you leaving us?" Marco grabbed her wrist, desperate. "We'll be good forever. Promise. Won't break anything. Won't scream. We'll be good." The words sliced through her. Sophia's eyes shimmered. "Please don't go, Mom. Please." Maria felt her breath catch. This wasn't just fear of the attack. It was fear of abandonment. Fear carved deep into the twins' bones, and now into Sophia's too. They didn't need discipline or structure or rules. They needed someone who wouldn't vanish when life got hard. Someone who would choose them even when it meant danger. Someone who wouldn't call them a burden. A mother. And Jay. He didn't need a housekeeper or hired help. He needed someone who understood these children the way he never learned how to. Maria looked at the 3 faces in front of her, tear-streaked, terrified, vulnerable in a way that broke her open. She sat on the edge of the bed, pulled them all close, and spoke clearly, firmly, so they would feel every word. "I'm here." She cupped their cheeks, brushed their hair back, held their trembling hands. "I'm not going anywhere." The relief was immediate and overwhelming. The kids crashed into her, arms around her neck, small hands gripping her shirt like they were afraid she might disappear between blinks. Their breathing hitched against her collarbone, warm and desperate. She held them, and, for the first time in a long time, let them hold her back. Jay stood quietly in the doorway. He didn't interrupt, didn't speak, didn't step closer. He just watched, a man realizing that this woman had done the one thing he couldn't, made his children feel safe. When the kids finally calmed, exhausted from crying, Jay moved forward. Not with his usual authority, but with careful intention. "I want you to stay," he said softly. "Permanently." Maria met his eyes. "I'll protect you and Sophia. Full-time security. A residence here, if you're willing. A salary beyond what we discussed." He paused. A long, weighted silence. "And something else." His voice deepened, almost hesitant. "A place here with us. Not as staff." He didn't say the word, but Maria felt it settle into her. Slowly, surely. Family. Not the one she expected, but the one she'd already begun to belong to. A home built not by blood, but by choice. And by the courage to stay. The brownstone felt strangely quiet after the chaos. Quiet in a way that didn't feel tense or dangerous, but softened, as if the walls themselves exhaled. Maria settled on the couch with the kids. She meant to sit only for a moment, but exhaustion claimed all three of them at once. Luca's head slipped onto her lap. Marco curled into her side, small fingers hooked in her shirt like he feared losing her even in sleep. Sophia stretched across her legs, breath warm and steady. 3 little heartbeats slowly syncing with her own. The weight of them wasn't heavy. It was grounding, anchoring, a warmth she hadn't realized she'd been starving for. Maria brushed her hand through Luca's hair, then Marco's, then Sophia's, her movements slow, instinctive, tender. Across the room, Jay stood in the doorway. No command in his posture. No sharpness in his expression. Just quiet observation. And something softer than she had ever seen in him. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. In the dim light, Maria looked around the room. This room she had once entered as an outsider, unsure and overwhelmed. She had scrubbed these floors, folded sheets, disinfected toys thrown in tantrums. But now, sitting here with these children sleeping against her, it felt like something else entirely. Not obligation. Not duty. Belonging. Not because she had tamed wild little boys or proven herself useful, but because, somewhere between fear, chaos, and laughter, she stopped running. She stayed. Dawn crept into the living room in soft gold stripes. Maria blinked awake, neck aching slightly, but warmth still draped over her legs and torso. The kids were still asleep, Luca's hand resting over her heart, Marco's cheek pressed to her arm, Sophia curled at her side. They looked peaceful in a way she hadn't seen before. Safe in a way that felt real. Across from her, Jay sat in a chair, elbows on knees, watching them with an expression that almost startled her. Gentle. Hopeful. Human. "You stayed," he murmured. Maria shifted carefully so she wouldn't wake the kids. "I told them I would." He nodded slowly. "The Castellanos will come again." "I know." His eyes held hers. "You're sure about this?" Maria inhaled, letting the truth settle inside her before she answered. "Are you?" The question wasn't a challenge. It was an invitation. Jay's lips curved, not his usual tight, careful smirk, but something real. A smile that reached all the way to his eyes. I've never been more sure of anything. The room fell quiet again, not with fear this time, but with an unfamiliar sense of beginning. Not a fairy tale. Not safety without cost. But a family worth fighting for. Days later, the shift was unmistakable. The twins were laughing, actual laughter, bright and unrestrained, as they played with Sophia in the living room. Toys were scattered everywhere, but instead of chaos, the space felt like childhood. Marco tugged Maria's sleeve. Look. He held up a drawing. Crayon lines messy, colors bright. This is our family now. The picture showed two small boys, one girl, a woman, and a man standing slightly behind them. That's you, Miss Maria, Marco announced proudly. And that's Dad. And that's us. Luca edged closer. You're staying forever, right? Maria knelt so she was level with them. She placed a hand on each of their shoulders. I'm staying forever. Across the room, Jay leaned in the doorway, watching. His posture was still strong, still protective, but the hardness had eased. He looked like a man learning how to be present, not just vigilant. When Maria met his gaze, something quiet and certain passed between them. A promise, spoken without words. Later that evening, Maria looked down at her hands, still cracked from years of cleaning, but now wrapped around three smaller ones. Their fingers fit together naturally, like something that had been waiting to happen. Her thoughts came like a whisper. I came here desperate, drowning, just trying to survive. I found three broken boys who needed someone who wouldn't leave. A man who'd forgotten how to be soft. And somewhere in the chaos, I found what I'd been searching for all along. Outside, dusk settled over the brownstone, warm light spilling from the windows. Children's laughter echoed softly. This isn't a job. Not survival. Home. And the lingering truth. Sometimes family isn't what you're born into. Sometimes it's what you choose. And sometimes it chooses you back. If you believe every child deserves someone who won't leave, subscribe to Invisible Romance Tales right now. Only people who abandon the ones who need them most won't hit that button. Comment I stayed for this if you watched until the end. Because this story isn't over. It's just beginning.